Alrighty, what's up guys? We are back again with another video. This one is more theory of Moonkin style video where I'm going to be talking largely about what corruption you should wear as a Moonkin, predominantly in Mythic Plus. Of course, there's going to be some overlap and we're going to talk about like general concepts, but this is more focused towards Mythic Plus corruption as that can get a little bit trickier than other stuff. In addition to that, I'm going to leave this Google Doc down in the description so you guys can check it out. It's got a bunch of random stuff like single target data for just corruption values per point. There's like a chart. There's AoE values and a chart for that as well. But beyond that, make sure you guys follow me on Twitch and stuff like that. Check all my other stuff down in the description. And with the beginning of this video, we're basically going to be talking about the theory behind Expedient versus Twilight Devastation in Mythic Plus and which is better. And we can just like jump straight into it. Expedient is definitely better, but I'm going to try to explain why. So you can actually see here, we actually have a graph and we have the per point values of Expedient and Twilight Devastation and how they end up working out. So on single target, you can actually see down here, Twilight Dev is actually just like half as good as Expedient. However, it takes up to 8 targets for Twilight Dev to be twice as good as Expedient. And so Expedient is just like more well-rounded in general too. And the reason for that is because if you guys haven't played with Twilight Devastation, basically, if you're not facing the correct direction and if you're not within 25 yards of the target, then you're also just going to be, you're just not going to be able to get your full proc value on it. I mean, so with that as well, so Expedient is just going to be far more consistent because Twilight Dev also has some variance to it as well. Basically, Twilight Devastation, if you get a proc on a huge AoE pull, right as the pull starts, right as it has, I don't know, a bunch of mobs that like are inconsequential, and then like a bunch of like normal mobs, then it's going to look really good. However, if you get the proc at the bad time, like right as the pack is ending, then it's going to look terrible. And at the end of the day, there's probably a large swing of variance in Twilight Devastation, whereas Expedient's always going to be consistent, which has to be factored in as well. Here's just like number of targets at the bottom and damage per corruption. The red is actually Expedient, the blue is Twilight Devastation. So it gives you kind of a better idea of how the stuff ends up working out. So the intersection of these is probably somewhere in like the 2.9, 2.8-ish target range, where Twilight Devastation and Expedient should, in theory, do about the same damage. But in reality, it's probably going to be somewhere in the range of like, probably like in the 5 to 8 target range, where in practicality, it's probably more like up towards that upper bound of like 8 targets where you're going to be getting better value out of Twilight Devastation because of, like I was saying earlier, where the facing requirement and just the general being within 25 yards range is just not reliable for you as a Moonkin inside of dungeons specifically. And that's why you want Expedient probably for dungeons. There's other traits such as like Honed Mind or Void Ritual that are probably also decent. Honed Mind, of course, is the mastery proc, and Void Ritual is just like the secondary stat, like the other proc that you can actually get out of raid. But of course, the Void Ritual, you want other people running it. Honed Mind is just, I would say Honed Mind is worse than Expedient, but Honed Mind is not bad, and that's about how I feel about that. But more of the point of this is just, if you have the option, which most people do not have the option, but if you do have the option to run Expedient or Twilight Devastation in Mythic Plus, and you have like a full Expedient set, then that would be of value. Of course, there's something to be said that Twilight Devastation Rank 3 has a higher budget. Like, of course, it comes with like 75 on it, so it's easier to get a lot of per point value out of Twilight Devastation. But if you're talking about just theoretical, what is the best, it's going to be, you're going to be leaning towards the other stuff, like the Honed Minds, the Expedients, stuff like that. Void Ritual also pretty decent as well. Beyond that, I don't really have too much more to say. Just like I make sure that I keep my Wowhead guide fairly up to date, especially with all this corruption stuff as it's been changing. This document I'll probably also be using to try to keep all of my stuff up to date in terms of just like getting graphs and stuff for Wowhead and just general information if more hotfixes and changes do end up occurring. So you can also check this out. I'll try to be updating it as quickly as possible if there are like major changes, but of course, I do have a life occasionally and have to do things. As for what a balanced like setup for Mythic Plus would be, like the best setup I would probably say would be just as much Expedient as possible, and then probably one Gushing Wound trait. I think one Gushing Wound is actually pretty sick, because Gushing is actually still pretty good on in the 2 to 3 target range as well. It of course, like whenever you start to get to that like 4, 5, 6 targets, Gushing Wound kind of falls off pretty heavily in terms of per point damage. You can actually see this in like the AoE data. It's just like not as good at 475, like 196 per point. So it's just like not as good whenever you start to get to that upper bound. But in general, Gushing Wound, one Gushing Wound, as much Expedient as possible. If you have to take like one of the tier 1 or tier 2 Twilight devs to be able to fill out your full corruption budget, that's also probably not that bad. But that is that. I hope you guys all have a great rest of your day. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Check all my stuff down in the description. Of course, I've been streaming a lot lately, doing a lot of Mythic Plus, streaming progression rating, all that kind of shit. So I hope you guys all have a great rest of your day. I'll see you later. Peace.